Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Julie and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
We're studying the book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman, and it's over on our website at marriagepuzzle.com/books, but we're going to move to Principle 4 in this episode, which is called Let Your Partner Influence You. So if you're just now jumping in as a review, the first 3 principles that we've covered were 1, enhance your love maps, 2, nurture your fondness and admiration, and 3, turn toward each other instead of away.
Yeah, the book wraps up the first group of topics by saying when you honor and respect each other, you're usually able to appreciate each other's point of view, even if you don't agree with it. When there's an imbalance of power, there's almost inevitably a great deal of marital distress. And basically all 3 of those first principles, enhancing your love maps, nurturing your fondness and admiration for each other, and turning toward each other, are there to kind of help set up this one, talking about, when you appreciate each other's point of view, not having an imbalance of power, that all kind of pulls in with principle 4, like Julie said, letting your partner influence you. So Gottman did a 9-year study of 130 newlywed couples, and he said that he discovered that men who allowed their wives to influence them had happier relationships and were less likely to eventually divorce than men who resisted their wives' influence.
Yeah, now the book swings more towards husbands letting their wives influence them, but we, Thomas and I, believe it's basically a shared power by both the husband and the wife equally participating in decision making. Because by valuing your spouse's opinion or their say in the matter, you naturally will search for common ground when there's a disagreement rather than just insisting on getting your way. So we don't allow whining in our marriage.
in our household period with our kids either.
Like our toddler right now, she's in the phase of throwing herself on the ground, stomping her feet, and just waiting for us to give in. I'm like, no, I'm not listening to whining. You can use your words, and that's a principle we apply to our marriage too.
That's funny that you bring that up, because when we said insisting on getting your way, that's exactly who I thought of, was our 4-year-old, stomping her foot at me when she's mad at, what I'm telling her to do. And that's kind of how we can get in marriage sometimes, if you're not really open to what your spouse has to say, or hearing their point of view, or what their influence is in the situation, then a lot of times we can't just be like, no, this is how I want it done, or this is how I want it to be. And we kind of, metaphorically are stomping our foot at them, saying, no, this is what it's supposed to be. And I think that, really changes things in terms of conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we're not really on the same team, as this is trying to imply and say that we need to allow ourselves to influence each other,
Mm-hmm.
It really does kind of turn into that whining, whether literally or more metaphorically, just kind of being frustrated that you're not getting your way. So go ahead.
I would say we just don't make decisions without each other. So, when we were trying to say what we believe here and equally participating in decision making, we don't just make a decision and come home and say, this is what I decided. So neither, when you're insisting on getting your way, sometimes I think when that happens in a marriage and there's that immaturity and whining instead of just that common ground of talking about it, maybe that's why then you would start making decisions without your partner, because you don't want that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't think there's wisdom in that too, like just making a decision, maybe even in a vacuum, and then coming and saying like, I decided this. Now if there's quick decisions sometimes in life that needs to happen, so then it's like, hey, we need to talk about this because we need to decide this today. Cool, let's do it, but it's not just like, well, I had to decide this, so I just did this.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, in probably 99% of situations. Occasionally something may pop up where you just have to make a decision, and hopefully, and if there's not enough time to talk to your spouse, which there always should be, even a quick text message, you should be able to like throw something out to them. But if you work on these principles on the front end, then if you had to come home in a one-off situation like that and tell your spouse, hey, here's what I had to decide, most likely that conversation is going to go a lot better because you will have proactively talked about things. You will have proactively gone over the scenarios that would have been surrounding that possible decision, and you could have made the best guided decision. But I think that, what you're saying is absolutely right, that, we should be going through all of that stuff with our spouse and being proactive and utilizing these principles and everything else we teach you in the podcast. But that way you're really truly on the same page with your spouse. You're in sync going into a decision, or a conflict. That way you can resolve it quicker. And I think that that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, I think that it's just finding that value
Mm-hmm.
in your spouse's opinion, that you want their input in those decisions, and you want to allow their influence, because when a husband and wife accept each other's influence, it strengthens their friendship. And I think that's because, even the book talks about one that could be the absence of frequent power struggles, making their marriage more pleasurable. When they accept influence, you're not going to have that power struggle all the time. And two, each person is then open to learning from their partner and learning from each other, and listening to their perspective.
Yeah, and when you said that it strengthens the friendship, I started smirking over here, and you kind of gave me this weird look. No, I started smirking because what popped into my head was the movie Frozen, and where Anna meets Prince Hans, and they're singing the song, and they say, and we finish each other's sandwiches.
Yeah, we're parents of a toddler.
And so that's what I thought about. But like from a, in that little analogy, it's like, if they had a deeper friendship, one, they probably would have said sentences instead of sandwiches, but maybe their friendship would have been, to be silly like that. And so strengthening that friendship makes it to where you're going to be more on the same page. You're going to have less of those power struggles, because you truly are deep friends. And I love how you also talked about, learning from your partner, because, we've talked about this on the podcast before, that when you marry your spouse, you don't just marry your spouse. You marry your spouse and their family and their upbringing and everything that has influenced how they view the world. And so by being open to their influence, you're getting an entirely different perspective that you cannot see that situation from. And so if you're not open to it, you're not going to be able to see a different angle, different solution, or anything like that. And so I really love how that part is, something that you mentioned, because I think it's vital to accept that from your spouse, because they have a whole different perspective. And who knows, every once in a while your spouse actually might be right. Just saying.
Well, that's what even John Gottman says, accepting influence is an attitude. You kind of have to choose to allow them in, but it's also a skill that you can hone if you pay attention to how you relate to your spouse. So day to day, what that looks like is working on these principles. That's why when we got our hands on this book, which we already thought we had a strong marriage, but you can always take a good marriage to great, or great to even better. And we started learning more from this book and implementing these. So it's that day-to-day working on all 4 principles that you have so far. Soon there'll be 7 principles, and not just listening to the advice that we're trying to put together in a quick podcast, but if you get the book, there's so many exercises.
Yes, there really are
in the book, and that you can do with your spouse or read individually. And that's what's been so cool about this, is it's kind of shaped more like a workbook. And so there's even this exercise in this chapter with the 4th principle, and they call this exercise the Gottman Island survival game. So it's basically like picturing yourself on this stranded island, which is always a fun game, right? To like picture yourself, and but
something bad had to happen to get stranded on an island.
Yeah, it's kind of like
I've seen Castaway. Like,
I'll be honest,
he ends up with Wilson at the end.
I'll be honest here and just say, like, I was kind of writing off this one as like, this is gonna be corny, like, but this isn't just the only exercise in this one chapter. Mm-hmm. That's something too. It's not just like, here's the principle and here's the one exercise. There's multiple ones to choose from too, so you can do them all. But I love that you can kind of find the ones that you want to try that might work. And so I totally wrote it off just with the name, the Gottman Island survival game. However, if you like read the details of it, you know, your mission is to write down on separate pieces of paper what you'd consider the most, 10 most important items to keep on inventory. And then your partner would do, the same thing separately, and then you share your list. And then I think you have to like influence each other to combine your list.
Yeah, to come up with one master list.
And it's like, okay, but it's teaching then these marriage principles in a fun way of, an unrealistic situation. But if you can apply the skills, then when you have a realistic situation, you'll be like, oh, we know how to talk through this from my list and your list and combine them to let each other influence each other in a positive way, to have that commonality and survive.
Yeah. And just to kind of give you, a little bit of a taste of some of the stuff that's on this list. Like, there's a big list here of just various items, and like you said, it's not just picking your 10 things, but it's prioritizing them in order. So like if, one of the things on here is 10 gallons of water. If I thought 10 gallons of fresh water was the most important, I'm putting that at the top. And you may put something like a shovel on the top of your list. There's things like toilet paper, pretty practical. There's, things like gun with 6 bullets, or 50 packages of condoms. You don't want to get pregnant while you're stranded on the island, right? So, so I think that it's cool because you really do then get to add those influences in, and it's really going to open up your lines of communication. It puts it into a little game to have fun with, but it's going to open up those lines of communication so you can really truly talk about like why. And what's going to happen is you're going to apply the communication and this principle to the game, and then later on, when you have a conflict or a situation that you're working through with your spouse, you're going to naturally find yourself just being more willing to be open to their influence because of how you practiced this little activity and game.
Yeah. So in short, let your spouse influence you. And we'll close with this quote: "The ability to accept influence is a cornerstone of success, no matter which type of conflict you're facing." So we look forward to you joining us next week, where together we'll work on marriage one puzzle piece at a time. See you later.
Have a great week.